Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us. My name is Christina Caesar, and I manage marketing and communications at Synergy Technical, and I have the honor of moderating today's session and introducing our speaker. Today's webinar will explore Microsoft Purview, which is the unified name for Microsoft's compliance toolset. Just a reminder, today's webinar is being recorded, and please drop any questions into the Q&A function within Teams. Just a little bit about us. Synergy Technical is an IT consulting firm headquartered in Richmond, Virginia. We have clients in over 70 countries and all 50 states and manage over 2 million licenses of Microsoft 365 for our clients through our licensing and managed services practice. In February of 2020, we were awarded the Microsoft 365 Security Deployment Partner of the Year award. And a large part of that success is the work done by today's presenter, Adrian Amos. So Adrian is one of our best sales engineers and solution architects who has deep level experience in the Microsoft suite, both productivity and security, and who's had the honor of running both productivity and security
immersion experience.
Customer immersion experiences at Microsoft Ignite for several years. Wow. And has had the honor as well. I'm obviously struggling through this.
That's all right.
With a raving introduction, I'm going to hand it over to Adrian.
All right. Actually, and I want to thank you guys for joining us today. This is very exciting for me because this is the first time I've actually convinced Christina to get on camera. She's not excited about it, but
can you tell that I honestly thrive?
Yeah, but we're in our new studio, and I'm excited to be presenting this. And so let's get into it. So thank you, and welcome to your first on-screen experience with the company. It's
thank
great.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey, we're thrilled to be here.
Subscribe because it'll get better in the future.
There we go. So we've been talking about compliance tool sets for a long time, and one of the questions that I get asked pretty regularly is what you see on the screen here is, does Microsoft offer data loss prevention in the cloud? And this is a blog post that I wrote, I think it was almost exactly a year ago, and we talked about what data loss prevention means to different people in different positions in different times of the day and looking at different technologies, right? It can mean everything from, making sure that emails don't go to the wrong people, to SharePoint doesn't allow downloads, to making sure that an endpoint doesn't allow people to migrate data from one place to another, right? It can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And what we really never had before was a unified set of tools to do that, right? Microsoft 365 has had a lot of different little point solutions that can be licensed through a lot of different vehicles that allow you to do a lot of different compliance and governance controls. But what happened last month with the introduction of the Purview name as the umbrella tool set was Microsoft actually finally brought all of these tools into alignment. Now, the licensing structure for them has not changed. So they're still currently licensed to the exact same vehicles and methods that we've always used. But right now we have a new name for all of them. So let's step back and talk about what compliance really is all about, right? I actually got an opportunity to present on a lot of this content 2 years ago at an event where we talked about decentralized identity. And a big part of what we manage with our data is identity, right? So looking back at like the entire history of how identity has been managed at a government level, we go back thousands of years. We talk about identifications through jewelry and the introduction of photographs and fingerprints, right? But after World War II, we start to see a pretty significant increase in the reliance on digital means for controlling identity, right? And once we start identifying or start controlling that identity, and we as organizations start becoming responsible for taking on the rights and responsibilities of managing that identity, we start to see governments around the world enabling controls for users, for the actual end users to say, hey, I maybe don't want you having access to all of this information, right? And it's been a pretty rapid growth in the last 20 to 30 years. And it really isn't a huge surprise that we have this massive uptick in compliance regulation growth starting in the early 2000s. And it really shouldn't surprise anybody that a lot of this stuff really started right about the time that Steve Jobs stepped on screen and showed off the first iPhone, right? Because that was the moment when we went from being able to say, I have all of my protected computer systems in my data center and never shall it leave the organization, right? But we also, some of us are old enough to remember implementing rules for Sarbanes-Oxley, and that was sort of a lot of our US first touch into managing compliance inside of an organization. So what we get out of allowing the cloud to do a lot of this work is if in traditional approaches where we have an actual data center, we would be responsible for a lot of point solutions and managing a lot of different compliance controls. And this is a security slide, but it actually applies pretty well too. But when we start actually taking some of the traditional approaches of taking compliance out of manual operation and start moving it into scenarios where the tool sets are allowed to not only give us greater compliance controls, but actually to enable automated investigations and automated testing of those controls, then we can actually start to get a more robust approach. We actually can go back and fill in a lot of those gaps a lot faster, right? So compliance doesn't have to be as much quite the full-time job that it might have been a couple of years ago. And we really start to get this rich interconnected matrix of data that's moving back and forth through all of these tool sets and giving us a lot of controls. But again, it used to not be organized, right? It used to just be this audit tool and that eDiscovery tool and all this kind of fun stuff. Well, now we can actually put all of it together, right? So again, we talk about Purview. The name itself, Purview, is not actually brand new to the Microsoft stack. This name was introduced about a year and a half ago. It was introduced as Azure Purview. And at the time, it was designed principally as an Azure workload. It gave us the ability to look at on-prem, cloud, and SaaS solutions, right? And looking at I'm not going to call it restricted, but not our Microsoft 365 data sets. What we got out of the change, it just came out last month, though, is that now we have all of that through end to end. So I want to talk for a second, though, because Microsoft calls the Azure Purview toolset their governance portal. And we need to understand a little bit about what is the difference between governance and compliance, because they are different words. So Merriam-Webster defines governance as the act or process of governing or overseeing control and direction of something. Okay, so you set the rules, you make the rules, you enforce the rules. Compliance is the act or process of complying to a desired demand, proposal, or regimen, or conforming to fulfill official requirements. So it's governing is I set the rules for this. Complying is I am following the rules that somebody else does. They are kind of the same thing. It just depends on where you are in the stack, right? If you're at the top, you get to govern. If you're at the bottom, all you get to do is comply. Well, as organizations, we sit in the middle. We get to decide some rules for our users. We also have to report on how we're meeting other rules to our governing bodies. So with that, in the Azure side, it's called the Governance Portal. In the Microsoft 365 side, it's called the Microsoft Purview Compliance Portal. And just to be super duper confusing and clear as mud, in both cases, you will be able to do governance and compliance controls. So what are we going to actually unify and bring into this space? We're actually bringing in 21 products, right? A lot of these things are Microsoft 365 workloads that we're used to, and then a few are principally Azure stack. So I went ahead and called out the differences. And we're not going to be able to go through 100% of all these workloads today. It's not really the goal. What we want to do is we want to dive in and look at these things, and I've kind of got them listed a little bit in order of kind of the rank of how I want to go through them. But we've taken all of the disorganized Microsoft 365 compliance and governance tool sets, and we've now unified them under Purview. Again, there is currently no licensing structure change. Okay, so and just like Microsoft has done with Intra for their identity tool sets that we're going to talk about a little bit more next month, this is really just right now just a set of renames. So the first thing we got to do is we got to talk a little bit about Microsoft and where we've come with this journey too, right? So this is what you're seeing is the Service Trust Portal. It's actually not even listed in our stack of tool sets here. This is a separate set. This is where you go to get Microsoft audit reports. This is where you go to say, hey, Microsoft, how are you doing? And this whole structure And you can see that compliance manager is listed on here, and trust documents and regions and industries and all that kind of fun stuff. All that is listed on here. And this actually used to be the original compliance manager location, right? Everything was in here. When we got to go and present on the very first iteration of some of these tool sets in 2018, everything was done out of this one web portal. But the tool sets have grown a lot over the time, and so yeah, actually, and that's yeah, it was version 1 of the compliance manager tool set. It was very rudimentary. Wow. It included all of like 6 different assessments that you could run, really? And yeah, and it was an ISO and a GDPR. And fun fact, all of this exists because of GDPR. Right, Microsoft brought all of these capabilities out into the light for us to start tracking our capabilities and compliance in the compliance manager, specifically to address GDPR before that went live. Like
pre-GDPR.
Absolutely, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's why all of this exists, and that's one of the main reasons why Compliance Manager as a tool is freely available to Microsoft customers. You can track your compliance in GDPR for absolutely free using Compliance Manager, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But I do want to take a moment and talk about what's not going to be here much longer. Okay, so this is the Microsoft or the Office 365 security and compliance feature set that we've been using for the last several years. We've had the compliance.microsoft.com space live in our tenants for a while. I know a lot of people are still using the old space, but it is going away. And while most of the links over here will actually redirect you into the new portal, a couple of them won't. And that's not to say that their functionality has been deprecated. It's that they've been replaced. And one of my absolute favorite ones in here was setting up supervision. And supervision as a tool set doesn't exist anymore, but it has been replaced. There is a new product that does that in the Microsoft Purview stack. So without any further ado, I'm going to jump into a live demo because I love to live and die by the demo, right? So we are in the Purview portal. Or the compliance portal, I should say. I'm not going to be in the governance portal because I don't have anything to actually govern in the Azure side, so we're going to stick entirely in this portal for today. So the first thing to note is that there's usually an introduction thing, how to get started with stuff. We're going to skip through all that. And what we're going to start with in most cases, and we'll probably spend the most time in, is actually the compliance manager. And if I jump into that, which I don't know why I can't click because, hey, there we go, live and die by the live demo. Let's see if we can jump out and jump back in and get it to turn clicky on me. I'm gonna have a little problem here. Let's see. I might have to stop presenting and come back in because I can't click.
Say, for clarification, I've never been filmed during these webinars, as many as Adrian and I have done, so I'm learning just as quickly as y'all are, and it's fascinating to watch the back end of how this works. It's absolutely, I'm learning a lot, just as much as y'all are.
All right, I'm going to reload that page and give me just a moment.
Live and die by Microsoft.
I don't think it's actually the portal. I think it's my computer.
Well, this is on.
One moment.
Everyone's having a great day. Happy Thursday. Thursday, as I had to do it. I had to do it.
Wow.
I'm going to get so much grief for that later, but this is what virtual work is like. We just go with the flow.
All right, I got links again. So give me one moment.
Trial and error. Just a reminder, if anyone has any questions or comments, please drop them in the Q&A function within Teams, and I will address them, call them out, call Adrian out, all the above.
Right, there we go.
Here we go.
Okay, so we're starting with our compliance manager. And if you look through this, if you spend any time in the Microsoft security space, and we've talked about this a lot when we do emerging experiences, compliance manager and its sister products, Secure Score, are designed to look and feel and operate very similarly. And that is very much by design. And we'll talk a little bit about how they interact. But if I jump into my So I've got my compliance manager right here. I've got the overall score, I've got my key improvement actions, and I got my solutions that affect my score. If I come back to the security side of things and I look at secure score, it is organized exactly the same way. I'm going to have my score, my actions to review, and a comparison space. And just as with secure score, when I go into my recommended actions here, I'm going to have my key improvement actions, right? It's designed to operate exactly the same way. We're going to get a quick at-a-glance view of what's driving the security in our environment. We're going to be able to see how many points we've achieved with all these things. And what's interesting is that there's actually a great breakdown on the documentation for Compliance Manager that explains exactly how your points are scored. There are actions that can require a remediative action. There's actions that just require basic documentation, and those differences will drive what the achievable points are out of these things. But what's really important here is that, you know, we have all of these different assessments and assessment templates that are available, and I'm going to jump into this for a hot second, and we choose which are the templates that are important for us, right? And this is generally going to be deciding where is it that we do business, what regions on the planet do we do business, and what are the things that are important to us to make sure that we protect. In my environment, I'm going to make sure that we are meeting the requirements for GDPR. Everybody gets a data protection baseline that comes online by default, and then there's 707 additional included or available premium templates. Now there is a separate licensing structure for these premium templates, but whereas we used to only have 6 things available total in the first version of this thing, we now have 20 included, and where we see a lot of folks lighting things up is these NIST templates, GDPR, and then some of the ISOs and the FedRAMPs. So, and one other caveat too, if you ever see a product that sits around for years and years and years in preview, it's because Microsoft doesn't release tools into general availability until they are capable of meeting FedRAMP moderate out of the gate. So we have all of these available assessment templates in my organization here. I've lit up these 3, and you can see right now that they show 2 of them show that they are pending updates. Now, this is really important because these are regulations that are constantly changing, right? And when we are, you know, asking Microsoft to help us assess for the compliance of our environments, we need to make sure that we're able to keep up with the changes in those tools. So what this gives us the ability to do is come in here and assess to the version that we lit up a couple of years ago, or we can review the update and say, okay, so there's some changes here. Oh, there've been create a record labels to apply to documents and emails. So there's just some things here that are acceptable. I can actually download the current template and I can pull it apart and look at how they compare against each other. I can see change details, right? I can see that some things have been added, some things have been removed. I'm going to go ahead and accept the update, and this is going to happen periodically, right? As changes occur to the law, Microsoft's lawyers are on top of keeping that, that data up to date. Now I'm going to show all the controls and all the actions and all the assessment requirements that are applicable now based on the current version of GDPR. Now, once I've done that or decided not to do it, I can jump in here and I can actually look and see how am I progressing. And there's a lot of things that are my responsibility, and there are a lot of things that are Microsoft's responsibility, and I haven't done a super hot job here of keeping up with this. But if I want to see how the assessment breaks down across multiple categories, and you know what, I'm actually going to jump out of GDPR and I'm going to go to one where I've done a little teeny bit of work here. I'm going to go to NIST 800-53. And all right, so we got some controls that have been achieved here. And now we can actually see kind of across our verticals, what are the areas where we need to spend the most time focusing on. It looks like I have a whole lot of failed controls here in the secure system and communications protection space. Now, this is a demo tenant. I kind of want it to fail because I want to be able to break things from time to time. But I'm going to be able to look at all of the actions that I need to take. And what's really neat here too is that if an action in one assessment is going to drive an impact in another, I will see that if I do this action, I will also get credit for it in the GDPR assessment. And this is a 9-point action, so it's not a critical remediation, but I can actually assign this out to any user in my organization. They're going to get an email that says they are now responsible for handling this compliance control. Give that a second here to go through. Live and die by the demo.
I was gonna say, watch you trial and error this.
All right, now, when Annemiek gets this email saying that she's responsible for doing this, right, she's going to get notes in very simple language telling her how to do this. And if she wants to upload her testing details, right, that's all in here. If she wants to see what are the controls against which this action is going to be assessed, she can see all of that too. If she needs to upload custom documents, like a Microsoft Word document that actually has all the testing details in there, she can do that. She can also then reassign this to somebody else to actually do the final assessment. And then we actually can decide what the testing source should be for a lot of these. And that's where SecureScore comes back into play. SecureScore is actually looking at the current state of the switches and actions and controls in my entire Microsoft 365 environment. And what Microsoft has given us the ability to do is actually use SecureScore as a testing source for a lot of our compliance controls in Compliance Manager. So if I come back out of that specific assessment or come back out of that specific control, and I give it a moment because everything takes a moment right now.
1 hot second, please.
Yeah. All right, actually, let me come up to assessments overall. I'm going to look at Compliance Manager settings, and this is where I can determine what my testing source should be. I have the ability to turn on SecureScore for all of my improvement actions, and you probably should. It's probably the easiest way to do it. But, you know, just to turn it on per action item kind of shows me the extent to which we have a lengthy list of controls that can be individually assessed. So we can actually decide, hey, I only want SecureScore looking at a few of the controls. I want to still maintain manual responsibility for some of these things. And then we can actually also get in and look at the user history too. Have people been coming in and closing these assessments? Or let's say I've got somebody in the organization who's been inappropriately assigned some of these. I can actually reassign directly from here as a compliance officer and say, you know what? Carl Edwards ought to have these things. It shouldn't be Annemiek anymore. Oh, well, okay. And there we go. There's Live and Die by the Lab demo, right? But we can do this, right? And actually, some of this has to do with roles and responsibilities that exist within the compliance framework. And I have not given myself full God mode to everything. So, so Compliance Manager, right? Super easy way to get started keeping track of all the compliance requirements. Now, I will say SecureScore can assess a lot, but compliance is not all technology, right? Compliance is a combination of people, processes, and technologies. So there will be a lot of things in here that you can just turn on the control and it works, but there's also going to be an absolute ton of things in here where you're going to need to come in and actually specify how you test, specify how you're keeping track of things. And then once you're done with all that, if I actually go back into my assessments and it's time to actually do some reporting to my compliance officer or to my auditors, once I determine what everything works the way I want it to go, I can generate a report. And this will come out, this will produce a CSV file that'll go by both control and by action so that my auditors can look at the state of my environment. And if I pop that open, let's see, Excel, what do you think of this file?
For everyone else on the webinar, I hope y'all appreciate it. I'm getting like the live. I didn't know any of this either. Yeah. And I love watching this live because I'm learning so much.
So yeah, and then here we go. Here's the control family. We have the customer managed list here, and then we have the Microsoft managed list of all the controls that are required to pass this particular audit. And then now I, as the the compliance officer in the organization, can just throw an Excel file over the fence and let the auditors handle that. Or if I really want to fly close to the sun, I can just give them access into Compliance Manager and they can go get the data themselves. So there's a lot of controls in here, and it's really worth taking some time to go through Compliance Manager as a whole and light up the assessments. Certainly get started with the free assessment templates that are in there. Every single one of these actions, it's going to show you not just what assessments is associated with, but even which Microsoft 365 workloads it applies to. So there's a ton of rich data in this. But moving on, right? Because we can't spend all day in Compliance Manager as much as I might like to. There's a lot of other workloads that are pulling data and looking at the way that we have shared our data, that we're retaining our data, that we are keeping our data in our workloads. And while most of them live down here under solutions, Microsoft has done a great job of giving us this data classification panel that allows us to get kind of at a glance look at what we are doing, how we're doing it, how we're meeting our own goals and expectations, and then allowing us to really build out a lot of great information in the areas that drive development in the others. And that'll make a little bit more sense in a minute. So we have some data that is in our environment. And while no retention labels have been detected yet, to be fair, I just created a couple yesterday. But we have the ability to see how our sensitive information types are being handled in our organization, and we can come through and decide which of these 262, I think, yep, there we go, 262 available sensitive information types can and should be managed inside of our organization. And what's great is while we can absolutely add to this list, a lot of these are very carefully curated pieces of information. In fact, there's a Microsoft article that explains how these things are done. It is a terrifyingly complex article. If we go and look at credit card data, right, we can see that that's going to be a sensitive information type that's predetermined here. This is, we can copy this, but we cannot edit this because this is extremely complicated. There's a great article that's probably, if you printed it, it'd be about 50 pages long. It explains why you can't do 1111-2222.
You had to pick
right?
Credit card.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, it's extremely complicated, but you can absolutely come in and you can do, like, if you have shipping labels or whatever it is that you use as sensitive information types, right? You can create those and add them to your list. And then once you've done that, you can start controlling how that data is used. There's also built-in trainable classifiers in the data classification space, and that's going to have an impact not just on how we protect our information, but on how users are allowed to interact both with internal other users, with external users. All of it's going to build up together. And so if I look at the ones that are available just in English, right, we're going to come down to a list of, I want to say it was 17. I'm going to regret having said a number out loud, I think. No, it is 17. Look at that. And like, we can actually, there's trainable classifiers for recognizing customer complaints, discrimination, HR, finance, all that kind of stuff, right? This is data modeling that's built in that allows us to recognize these types of things without having to build in all the specific sensitive information types. And we can use these classifiers to identify other data. We also have the ability to then, once we've found data that may or may not be in the right places, we have a content explorer and an activity explorer too. So, we might see that there's some Hong Kong identification numbers here. Oh, yeah, she's excited. She wants to get in on all this.
I'm going to Thailand for my honeymoon, so I had to,
all right.
Asia in general.
And I didn't give myself full access to get into all this stuff too, but I can see in the activities side that certain labels have been, or labels have been applied, changed, read, whatever. These things are happening, and see who the users are. But for the Content Explorer, I actually have to have very specific rights that allow me to dive into these locations. But I can see at a glance, what are the sensitive information types? What are the sensitivity labels that are happening here? And are my trainable classifiers picking up on things? Are my users working on building their own personal resumes when they're at the office? Maybe I don't want them doing that. Maybe I shouldn't be tracking that. I don't know, it's an ethical conversation for you to have. But we can see what our users are using, how they're using it. Are they actually using the sensitive labels that we want them to, or the sensitivity labels? And let's talk about sensitivity labels, because that's one of the core elements of what we're doing with compliance and governance, right? We want to make sure that the right data is visible to the right people in the right workloads from the right places. And that sounds an awful lot like a security conversation, and security and compliance certainly go hand in hand, but we're looking at it from a governance of our own data perspective, okay? And the way that we're doing this in our organization is we are producing sensitivity labels, and these are going to be shown to users as easy buttons. This is internal data. It will harm our organization if it gets out. This is HR data. It will not just harm our organization, but it will also cost us a lot of money, right? Because while security breaches are a challenge for us financially, compliance breaches can be an awful lot more expensive for us. Fines going into the millions and billions in some cases. So what we want to do is, as security and compliance people, right? Microsoft 365 security and compliance. I
was there when he got the mug. He's never been more proud.
I love that mug.
He's never been more proud in his life.
We want to produce simple, easy labels for our users to see, and we want to only show the right labels to the right people, right? So everybody in the organization is going to have, in every single office workload, they're going to be able to see public, general, and internal. And we're going to ask them to, hey, if this is the information that should stay internal, you just mark it as internal. And when they do that, certain things are going to happen. This data that's marked internal is going to be encrypted. So anybody external to the organization won't be able to view it. Even if they copy it off into a USB file and do all that kind of fun stuff, it will still check back in with my tenant to ensure that the right user has the right access to it. And it's also going to have certain rights management controls on it too. If I mark something as HR content, I'm not going to allow users to print it, right? Even if they do have access to it, that's got to stay digital records. It cannot go to a printer. But we're going to take all of these labels and we're going to package them up so that people who need access to the HR department label will be able to see that, but that general folks in the organization will not be able to see it. So it's super easy. Not only is it easy buttons for the users to use, but only the right users have the right buttons to use. And then we're going to take that and we're going to package it into a data lifecycle program as well, right? And this used to be totally separate from the Purview stack, right? So we had information protection that people have bought with the enterprise mobility and security stack, right? But then rights management as retention was always an Office 365 workload. Well, now we've just brought all that together, right? We've just said, okay, we need to both manage who has access and how long the data exists, right? So now we can actually establish our retention policies, and we're going to give that a moment to populate. And we are going to have labels that work exactly like they do in the information protection side. And then we're actually going to be able to take our label policies, just like we did for information protection. We're only going to show the right labels to the right people so that when they're working in content that should only be saved for 5 years, we can show them a 5-year label, or we can say, hey, this is HR data, or this is IT data. So now we're going to be able to get in 2 clicks, one for retention and one for sensitivity. How long should this data be kept? Who should have access to it? What rights should be associated with it? And all of that action is going to be tracked and tracked and audited and presented up to administrators right here. Now, those are probably the 2 most fundamental things that organizations need to do to make sure that they are protecting data and protecting themselves, because your data is both your greatest asset and it's also your biggest liability, right? One of the biggest challenges that we see a lot of folks dealing with is keeping too much data for too long. And there's a great Microsoft Mechanics video that was just published last week talking about specifically data that should be kept for a year but is kept for 10 is in some ways a 10-fold increase in your attack surface, right? So, we really want to make sure that we're applying these correct labels to the right locations, and then we can actually also have labels that reach in and find our data where it already exists, apply those labels appropriately, and we can actually also build what are called adaptive scopes, right? And this can be based on any number of user attributes, group attributes, whatever it is, the data itself, where users are producing content. If they are members of the HR department as identified by their Azure Active Directory attributes, we can have them automatically pulled in and their content automatically flagged and labeled and associated with what they need to do. And it's beautiful. We don't have to do this with groups. We can do it with data that's managed as part of the user lifecycle management. Their data already automatically gets picked up and managed with them. So super fun, super fun. I actually love it. It is fun for me. But we also have to talk about data loss prevention, right? We started by talking about that's the #1 question. We have a lot of controls that exist in all of these tool sets to do this. But when Microsoft says data loss prevention as a blade over here in this environment, what they're really talking about is controlling outbound or cross-bound communications in our productivity workloads like mail, like Teams. And what we're doing is we're just looking at email, SharePoint, OneDrive, and we're deciding what we want to do with data that users are sending. And it's going to be pretty simple. We're choosing these locations by default. We can actually add a whole lot more stuff now too with the great expanses of Purview now. We can actually bring in Power BI data as well. But what we really want to do is we want to look at those sensitive information types, right? Those are the underpinnings that are driving a lot of these tool sets. If we are detecting certain sensitive information types, what do we want to do with this data? And probably the easiest way to do this is actually to just create a new one. If I create a policy, it's going to start with these main categories, right? Are these financial, medical, and health? If it's medical and health, right, what is it? Well, we're going to say it's HIPAA content. It's going to pre-populate a lot of information about what our policy should look like. It's going to pre-name the policy for us. We can come right through here, pick all the things that we want. And again, it's, let's see, on-premises file repositories. I'll take that out. And then we go. We have review and customize default settings, or we can come in and create advanced DLP rules. We're not going to bother customizing. It's just going to build us this super easy, simple rule set for defining how we're going to protect that information, what we want to do as a protected item, right? We're going to give the users a policy tip, so show them on their screen, hey, you're getting ready to send information out that maybe you shouldn't. We're going to also then, send incidents to administrators if we choose to. We can actually also decide to allow users to override these things anyway or not. And then we can actually turn it on in just test mode. And actually, we find this to be really powerful for organizations, right? How do you get started training your users? Well, the simplest way is to show them something. Something is changing, right? Obviously, don't just turn things on and wait for the phone to ring. But it's super easy and it's super convenient for the users to be able to do all these things in test mode. And what's great is actually almost everything that we talked about today has a test mode, has a way to introduce the users to it without having to drown them in changes to their environment. And then, we also mentioned that DLP to a lot of folks means at the endpoint. And we actually now have the ability to do endpoint DLP settings, both for Mac, for Windows. We can define how we want to allow Bluetooth to operate. And actually, it's not even covered in here too, but all of our productivity workloads in the Microsoft 365 stack have their own DLP controls. And probably the easiest way to understand that is that if we create automations in Power Automate, we can actually bring in multiple different applications, both first-party Microsoft tools and third-party additional tool sets, right? Well, we can actually define barriers, DLP barriers in our Power Automate policies to say that, yes, I'm going to copy over a calendar invitation from my Microsoft calendar to my Google Calendar, but it's not allowed to communicate with certain types of data, or it's just not allowed to communicate between those two interfaces at all. So my users can build Power Automate, but they can't connect these two things. Why can't they connect them? Well, it's because we don't trust, as an organization, the communication between those two tool sets, right? So there's DLP kind of across the board, but for the purposes of the unified Purview set, we're looking at it principally as SharePoint, Exchange, OneDrive, and endpoint DLP rules. And again, we have this Activity Explorer too, that just like we had with the data classification space, we're going to be able to look across the board and see what are our users doing. And it's not just looking at it in the Microsoft 365 space. This is actually pulling in data from the endpoints themselves. You can see the user read the file on an endpoint device, right? The user created or added the label as an endpoint device. There we go. And some of this stuff is automatic, and some of it's user based. But we have a lot of different capabilities. And again, we can define alerts, set up alerts to go to whoever we want them to, based on our policies, based on whatever it is we're looking at. So all that's coming together. We have the ability, Microsoft calls out as a separate product in the 21 list, both this portal itself and Audit. Audit is always going to be capability here. There's actually audit retention policies. And, one of the things that I demonstrate pretty regularly in a security environment or security immersion experience is users accessing SharePoint from a personal device and being prevented from downloading files, right? And we do that in the security side with a conditional access policy that's actually written in SharePoint that surfaces into conditional access, but we want to audit and make sure that users aren't getting past that. So, we've got a lot of different controls here that exist. I want to watch for these specific users because these are my users that work from home pretty regularly. I want to look for SharePoint file operations, and I want to look specifically for downloaded files, downloaded file changes, and I want to hold on to these specific results for 6 months. And that's great. I mean, we can look through any of the workloads that we have available to us in the Microsoft 365 productivity stack, and we can surface them, and we have all of their API controls introduced into this audit retention policy so we can dig through. And if that's not doing it for us, we can actually do a search for things. We can do a content search across the board, right? You will need to give yourself specific rights in order to use some of these tool sets. But we've got the data lifecycle management, keeping data for a certain amount of time. We have information protection that's saying that, only the right people have the right access to the right files. We also have insider risk management and information barriers. Okay, so I did mention early that some of the things in the protection.office.com do not migrate natively over to the compliance space. And I mentioned my favorite tool set was supervision. And it just isn't there the same way. And I'm kind of skipping ahead a little bit because that's actually communication compliance now in the Microsoft 365 space. Wait, did I say supervision or did I say?
You said supervision.
All right, supervision. Yeah, I'm getting myself all twisted up. So supervision becomes communication compliance. In supervision, we would choose a group of users and we would say that we're going to monitor 10% of their email and we're going to send it to their manager to make sure that they're talking about things or they're using the right language or they're not, dropping profanity into our customers. Well, we don't need to monitor for profanity anymore because we have a trainable classifier looking for that, right? Mm-hmm. But we do want to make sure that our users are communicating in a way that we still want reflective of our organization. So in that case, what I might do is I might set up a detect inappropriate text, detect inappropriate images, monitor for sensitive info, again, building on those 262 sensitive information types, right? We're looking for conflict of interest information. And what we're going to do is we're going to choose a group of people or two, and we're going to define who our reviewers are going to be. And then we're going to define how much of their data we're looking at on a regular basis. And, by default, if you come up with these things, if you look into these things, by default, they're going to come up with some pretty unfriendly names. But we're going to choose a user or a group of users. Choose our reviewers, choose what data we're going to monitor. We couldn't do that in supervision. We could only do it for email. We're going to look for their communication directions, right? I'm not worried about the stuff that's coming in. I'm more worried about the stuff that's going out or that's going across. Maybe I want to look for these bits of information, but maybe I also want to look for credit card numbers and look at this guy right here. We can use OCR for scanned documents with these rules to make sure that somebody hasn't just scanned a credit card statement and is sending it off, right? They've taken a look at the customer's account information and they're going to scan it off with all this stuff. And we can run the review percentage all the way down to 0 or all the way up to 100. If you do run it up to 100, you're going to crush your logs. But we can absolutely look at all this information right here. It's already telling me the same thing I saw in my data classification. Mm-hmm. I see what is the information that's moving around in my organization, right? So do I want to create policies based on these insights? And that's fantastic. I absolutely love it. So we're able to make sure our users are using our communication systems to talk the way that we want them to. We can pause policies if we need to for whatever reason, but I don't recommend it. But then we can also build these information barriers, right? And this is a really crazy kind of concept here. I worked for a company for several years that wanted a separate global address list for the users that did not include any of the executives or the board members.
Wait, really?
Yeah, absolutely. They did not want executives showing up in the global address list because they didn't want somebody on a shop floor finding that name in the global address list and firing off an angry email. Okay.
Kind of valid.
But there's also been recent movement at Twitter where maybe you don't want board members reaching out to the user base, right, and trying to influence decisions. If we think about it in IT structures or even in using business class systems, I might have bought a business system that I want my organization using to communicate between certain departments, and I don't want them talking directly to each other. That creates either a backdoor or a conflict of interest, right? And while yes, I can create communication compliance policies, maybe I don't want my SOC analysts communicating directly with my IT systems administrators. I want them using my security tool sets to communicate, right? So I don't want them emailing each other directly. So what I do is I create these segments that exist in my organization, right? I've got a board of directors segment, and that's actually going to pull users based on group membership or attributes of the accounts. I can do the same thing with executives, directors, all these other things, all the way down to my shop floor operators. Once I've defined my segments, I can define policies that keep certain people from being able to communicate with others. And if I do create a policy, it's going to tell me, let's see, that if I build this, if I choose these segments, all right, I'm going to keep managers from talking to.
I'm watching from like 3 different screens.
Yeah.
Right now.
If I choose it, it's going to tell me, if I choose another segment, it's going to tell me that email, SharePoint, and OneDrive will be restricted. These users will not be able to communicate with each other over email, SharePoint, and OneDrive. So I'm going to cancel that. And what we've done in this environment is we've created exactly these two barriers, right? SOC and the sysadmins cannot talk to each other. Now, I did that specifically because in my Microsoft 365 security tool sets, my SOC analysts have the ability in their threat and vulnerability management to create a ticket in Intune to assign tasks to admins to get things done. I don't want them sending an email. And to make sure they're using the right tool sets, I can just create a barrier. So we can absolutely do that. I've also got, this rule built in here too that says board of directors and executives cannot be reached directly by the operators, right? So it's super easy to get started. Obviously, you have to choose what it is that you want to prevent in your environment. But then we also have this whole concept of insider risk management. And I mean, all of this stuff is the Purview stack, right? There's so much stuff that's in here. In insider risk management, we're looking kind of like we were looking at communication compliance for, inappropriate communications or all that kind of fun stuff. Now we're actually looking for users are potentially leaking our corporate IP out to other organizations. So in this case, we're actually going to be looking at, some recommended actions to kind of get started in this. It's going to show us activities that have been reviewed and detected. We are seeing folks that are sending a lot of communications out to specific people outside of the organization. Doesn't look like there's any particular exfiltration content or activities, but we can start assessing how we want to monitor for things like general leaks. And then if we do decide we want to start looking specifically at what's happening, we can turn on scoring, but we can create policies for all kinds of stuff that we want to look for. Data theft, outright specific data theft, data leaks by priority users. And what's really cool here is this actually ties into HR systems. So if you have a HR system that can be, I don't think the word is federated, but connected to Azure Active Directory in the right ways, right? There's a few that can do this. We can actually look at tying user behavior to things like termination date. So if a user has submitted a resignation and they've got 3 weeks left with the company and all of a sudden they start sending a ton of email out to some other company, that might represent a risk. Well, with these policies in place, we can actually recognize what that term date is without an admin having to go do something about it. And then the system will go back a designated period of time. By default, it's 30 days. You can go all the way back to 180 and look for previous communications between that user and that external organization and identify if they have been taking data out of the door. And there's more because we can actually also look at physical badging information, right? So it's not just have the user been taking content out of the systems, it's have they been getting into physically inappropriate places in the building, right? Have they been going into the server room? You know, it's not just the physical security, or it's not just the data security, it's physical security, because the USB key is another easy way to get data out. Well, we can actually look at that data. Are they walking into the server room and you know, get all kinds of good stuff there too. Some of this stuff is in preview. Some of it's, you know, does require that there's physical components that are connected to it. But there's so much that we can do now to look for insider risk. And then once we've identified risk, we can actually pull all of these things up into cases. And if I brain my way back. Oh yeah, and by the way, we can also add in all these third-party data connectors too. I almost forget about this, right? And Microsoft is adding content to this all the time, showing us what are popular things. We can join these things in, and just kind of like we do with Defender for Cloud Apps, we're actually looking at how users are moving our data around within these locations. Let's see, kind of the last area that I want to get to is eDiscovery, right? So this is another element that has been moved into the Purview space. I've got a basic case here that's created. We're looking for users that are talking about the CX500 project in our environment. What do we want to do with that? We can see that there's 12 items that are referencing that product name or that you know, data. 12 items total, 9 in SharePoint. It's across 6 different locations. We can see, you know, what the users are doing with it, and this is from a simple level. So if I come back to my eDiscovery standard and I go into create a case, actually, I want to get out of that. Where am I? I want to talk about what the difference is between standard and premium. Standard is going to give you the same ability to look across different things, but premium is going to layer in analytics. And we've talked about this a lot in the difference between a P1 offering and a P2 offering across the board. Is in general, the premium offerings are going to add in analytics. But the other thing that's really neat too is that we actually have the ability to build in attorney-client privilege detection as part of our eDiscovery processes, and also defining who our you know, officers are going to be, what our communication library is. Like, we've got all this additional information that's available in our premium eDiscovery capabilities. Let's see, I don't think I've done anything specific in here that shows, oh yeah, here we go. So yeah, you might have noticed in the standard one, there were like 5 different columns. Here we've got a whole lot more settings and controls that we can leverage against what's going on here. But that's kind of the Purview stack. You know, there's like I said, there's 21 things in the Purview stack, and I did mention that 4 of them are Azure controls. One of the things that we recently got the ability to do with information protection and our label policies is actually take those labels with us, those sensitivity labels, and ingest them into the Azure side of things. So now when we're looking at, you know, SQL records and all that other fun stuff, we can actually apply our Microsoft 365 labels across into those Azure workloads. So really give us a lot more unified control and kind of bring things back under one roof.
Well, so I hope so I've done hundreds of webinars with Adrian, and this is, I guess, the first time that you've seen my dumbfounded face. Every time Adrian presents, I learn something new. But we will jump right into Q&A. All right, first one. So I saw that most of the assessments in Compliance Manager are listed as premium. What is the difference between those and the included ones?
Okay, so that's a great question. And actually, let me jump back over and show you in the Compliance Manager, so everybody's on the same page here. If we look at the assessment templates, after we wait a minute for the page to load. All right. Under the assessment templates, there are 20 included assessment templates in Compliance Manager. I mentioned this used to be like 6 and they all used to be free. Well, obviously, there's an army of lawyers looking at an army of different, compliance assessments around the world. And what Microsoft has decided is that these 20 should be free for their customers, right? These are things that people need to drive toward on a pretty regular basis. In fact, the data protection baseline kind of brings in rules and requirements from most of the biggest compliance frameworks. But then there's also these 707 premium templates. There is a separate pricing structure for these premium templates. I don't know right offhand what that pricing structure is, but it is a per month assessment or cost for activating these premium assessments into your environment. Again, most US and most European customers generally can get by with the content that's up at the top. But again, there's just so many lawyers looking at so much information and staying on top of this that it is its own whole separate like cost center, basically.
Yeah. All right, and so when the old protection portal goes away, will my configurations natively transfer into the new compliance portal?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, and I'll jump back in for the hot second into that too, because it's all right. Oops, maybe put a com there. Maybe that'll help better.
Maybe, just maybe.
All right, so yeah, most of it will. In fact, most of it redirects automatically now. In fact, if I click on anything in here or most of the things in here, it's pretty much going to take me straight into the compliance portal. If I click on sensitivity labels, right, it's just going to take me right into compliance.microsoft.com. The one that won't is supervision, because that product itself has been superseded with the communication compliance.
Okay.
Yeah.
And last question I have at the moment, what is the best way to organize users for these tools? Security or Microsoft 365 groups, admin units?
Okay. So actually, admin units do not come in yet, and that's kind of something that I've been waiting patiently to see. Right? We talk about things that spend forever in development lifecycle. Administrative units spent like 6 years in preview, and they are fantastic for organizing your users into manageable chunks. However, I have not yet found a compliance tool in the Purview stack that recognizes admin units. I would imagine that support is coming. I don't know for sure. So right now you can manage most of the tool sets by group, but most also actually have direct support for ingesting users by attributes. So, whether you're a shop that likes to take your users and put them into dynamic groups based on attribute, or if you just want to suck the users into the actual tool by attribute, you can generally go about that either way. If you want those groups to surface into Microsoft 365 productivity loads, obviously an M365 group is the right way to go. If you don't want them ever showing up in a list, maybe a security group. But there's a lot of different ways to do it. And right now, the only one that I know that doesn't work across the board is admin units. But again, I'm hopeful that's coming soon.
Awesome. So everyone, you got another minute to drop any more questions in the chat, but Adrian crushed it as always. Thank you so much for attending today. You will receive a follow-up email with the recording by tomorrow. And in the future, please be sure to keep up with us on social media or check our events page for more upcoming webinars. If you have any questions, you saw Adrian's email on the Q&A slide, but it will also be provided in the email tomorrow. And I can also connect you with either Adrian or the appropriate AE. And we have a lot of webinars. I think we have one next Thursday on Power Up, so we're switching to productivity. Please register for that. And we have a lot of content on our YouTube channel as well. I think you've done around similar topics.
And so, Lexi's myth-busting content is fantastic. If you haven't checked it out, Lexi has been sitting here in this studio producing a lot to on myth-busting. Yeah, so we're very content focused. We have a lot of content for y'all. I'm not seeing any more questions in the Q&A, but thank you so much everyone for joining, and I hope you, again, check our events page or our social media, follow us on social media, and I hope you have a great rest of your Thursday. Thanks you so much, y'all. Bye.